Considering that the play itself is all about circles, evident in the imagery, the circular nature of the play's opening and closing, and the fall into chaos followed by the rising return to order, it's important to consider the plot lines as a device themselves. First and foremost, the parallel plot helps Shakespeare deliver his criticism of the misuse of authority, the abuse of power, the blindness of old men, the unnatural breaking of the bond between parent and child, and much more, because the parallel plot widens the scope of action beyond the king himself. The subplot, that is Gloucester and his sons, complements the main plot, that is Lear and his daughters, by intensifying the action for dramatic effect. While both plots emphasise the miseries of human suffering and the folly of man through misjudgment, attempts at love, thoughtless ageing and neglection of duty, the use of the subplot opens the criticism to all those who act in such ways. The subplot also provides Shakespeare with a way to provide emotional satisfaction and some answers by creating resolution, while the main plot doesn't provide emotional satisfaction to heighten the warnings that he is providing. The contrast and juxtaposition in the two plots and across them also drives the action of the play by creating and solving conflict. While Lear is meant to be the arbiter of order in this world, and Jacobean audiences with their knowledge of the power held by a king and the responsibility bestowed through the divine right of kings expected it, audiences can see that Gloucester's same mistakes and follies are just as bad. The dramatic irony that comes as a result of the parallel plot also provides audiences with forewarning of the tragic outcome, to warn them against such foolish actions that can so easily be seen with a bit of foresight, and to teach audiences the way to behave as they encounter the concepts. The similarities in the main plot and the subplot serve to heighten audiences' understanding and criticism through the repetitive actions. Shakespeare repeats the same actions and ideas in the other plot in order to reinforce to audiences the need for that action, such as in the case of Cordelia and Edgar's sacrifice to save their fathers, or to heighten audiences' criticism of the action or attitude, such as the blind folly of the fathers aging without wisdom, or the fathers' early desire to hand out justice when they perceive they have been wronged, which goes against the natural order and shows that true justice will inevitably be served whether you are king or man. Hopefully you can hear already where you might logically order and structure arguments by pairing characters or groups of characters together across the plot and subplot. Remember that the two plots work together to create meaning, so it would be wiser to structure arguments around the similarities or differences in actions or attitudes, rather than treating the plot and subplot individually and in isolation. There are also many contrasts in the plot which Shakespeare uses with or in addition to the parallel plot to reinforce some of the major ideas and perspectives on concepts that he would like audiences to take up. For example, by showing Kent's undying and complete loyalty especially evident when he says that he has raised his likeness, with the denotations of raise, that is R-A-Z-E, being to completely destroy and annihilate, as a positive action which leads to Lear's protection on the heath and from his own eventual madness, Shakespeare teaches that Kent's loyalty extends beyond any self-serving means and therefore should be celebrated. By contrast, it is Oswald's own desires and that he is easily bought and led by those around him that leads to his death. Although audiences see that Oswald is simply following Goneril's orders at the beginning when she tells him to put on what weary negligence you please, his aloof and arrogant behaviour towards the king and later Kent outside Gloucester's castle show that Oswald acts selfishly and that he is a willing accomplice to Goneril's plotting and a henchman without honour. Let's look at some other examples of how Shakespeare uses the parallel plot to invite audiences to take up positions. Shakespeare uses the specific word bond and general financial diction across the two plots to characterise Cordelia and her faithfulness as good and righteous, while also using the contrasting evil of Edmund to enhance this idea. By showing both of the fathers engaging in similarly blind criticisms of the bonds that they think they are owed or that their children have broken, Shakespeare further criticises their selfish, cruel, chaotic and immoral actions. For Cordelia, Shakespeare uses the word bond with its financial connotations to remind audiences of duty owed from parent to child, and therefore Lear's blindness in not accepting Cordelia's words, and also to show that Cordelia truly knows her father. The repetition of the financial diction that Lear has already used throughout the trial acts not as sycophancy like the empty and intangible eyesight, space and liberty of her sister's declarations, but instead shows that she values her father and his love. Lear's rejection of Cordelia's truthful and loyal response then only serves to criticise Lear's actions. In the subplot, in Edmund's sneaky and malicious actions against his father, Shakespeare repeats the word bond to emphasise the unnatural relationship between Gloucester and his bastard son. The invoking of revenging gods is ironic, as Edmund has just called on these same gods to stand up for his bastard self, with Shakespeare drawing on the Jacobean understanding that both his action and position is unnatural, meaning that audiences know not only is his plot against his father cruel, but it is so vengeful that Edmund is willing to risk the violent and deathly thunders they may bring. There are also big motifs that appear in both the main plot and the subplot. The motif of serpents is an interesting one because it is only the men who label women as serpents. But it is not just the fathers who label their children serpents, as we have Albany labelling his wife as a serpent, Edmund labelling the sisters as jealous of the other as the stung are of the adder, and then Lear comparing the actions of his daughters to serpents in several places. We can also find further connection across the plots in the motif of eyes and blindness, especially as it relates to the fathers. With this motif, Shakespeare constructs the fathers as the same at the beginning of the play, but their divergence is what invites us to view them differently in the end, and one of the ways that Shakespeare uses the parallel plot to show that personal failings are sometimes the most to blame for the disturbance of the natural order or the failure of fathers or the breaking of the parent-child bond. We can also look at the plot and the way that Shakespeare develops the outcomes for characters across the plot to understand why the parallel plot allows Shakespeare to enhance his messages on the major concepts of the play. For example, similar to their fathers, Cordelia and Edgar's plots run in parallel to each other to teach audiences lessons about what is right and proper, as well as to demonstrate the terrible and far-reaching consequences that occur once the world is turned to disorder. The evil siblings also have parallel plot elements which help audiences to see that their faults and Machiavellian manoeuvres are not solely because of their illegitimate nature or because of their age or gender. By showing the similarities in the parallel plot between these evil children, Shakespeare is able to make clear comment about what is right and wrong, as well as warning against particular behaviours and attitudes.